Headlines. I mean, everyone has heard about the unlimited vacation thing,
It's legendary at this point.
but we want to understand the actual mechanics of this machine. How do you take a DVD rental service, mailing literal discs in envelopes, and turn it into a global entertainment giant by running a company based on freedom and responsibility?
Without the whole thing just collapsing into pure anarchy.
Exactly, because when you first read it, it really does sound like anarchy.
Yeah.
But to understand it, you have to look at the foundational philosophy Hastings lays out early on. He makes a really sharp distinction between two types of organizations.
Right. The shift from process over people to people over process.
Yeah, so he talks about the safety-critical organization. Think about a hospital or a commercial airline or a manufacturing plant.
In those environments, the entire goal is consistency. You want the process to be so bulletproof that it's actually stronger than the people. You are trying to engineer human error out of the equation completely.
Because an error in a hospital kills someone.
Exactly. Or a defect on an assembly line causes a multi-million-dollar recall. That is the traditional corporate America model. Process over people.
But Hastings argues, and we're just laying out his perspective here, that Netflix operates in what he calls the creative economy.
Right. Their existential threat isn't a misplaced decimal point. Their biggest threat is becoming completely irrelevant.
It's failing to invent the next big show, or missing that massive shift from DVDs to streaming.
So to avoid that, they completely flip the model. They realize that rigid rules are great for efficiency, but they absolutely suffocate innovation.
And Netflix decided they were going to prioritize innovation and agility above literally everything else.
Which brings us to this concept from the book of leading with context, not controls. This is such a critical mechanism to understand, and honestly, it's where a lot of leaders misunderstand the Netflix way. It is not that managers there are totally hands-off.
No, not at all.
They're extremely hands-on, just in a totally different way. In a traditional control model, the boss makes the decision, and the employee just executes it.
And if you want to change something, you go up the ladder and ask for permission.
Right. But in the context model, the manager's sole job is to dump a massive amount of context onto the employee. The strategy, the financial stakes, the exact why behind the company's goals, and then...
Then you step back and let the employee make the actual decision.
Exactly. The book uses this idea of a decision pyramid versus a tree. If your employees are making bad choices, you don't instantly slap a new control or policy in place.
You look in the mirror.
You ask yourself, what context did I fail to provide? Did I not explain the budget constraints clearly enough? It shifts the blame for a bad operational decision back onto the leader's inability to communicate the landscape.
Which, I mean, that sounds incredibly empowering for the employee. But let's be totally real for a second. That entire system rests on a knife's edge.
It really does.
You cannot lead with context if the person receiving that context doesn't have the world-class judgment required to use it properly. You can't just give total freedom to average employees and expect greatness.
And that brings us perfectly to the first major pillar of this whole ecosystem. Everything we're talking about, the speed, the lack of rules, it all fundamentally rests on what Hastings calls talent density.
I found this part of the source material to be the most confronting, honestly, because most companies, whether they admit it or not, operate on a bell curve.
Sure, you have a few absolute superstars, a big, bulky, middle-of-average performers, and a few people dragging their feet at the bottom.
Netflix completely rejects the bell curve.
They argue that in creative, knowledge-based work, the absolute best person isn't just twice as good as the average person. They are 10 times better.
The mythical 10x performer.
Exactly. So their stated goal is to have a team composed exclusively of those extremely high performers, high talent density.
And the mechanism they use to ensure that density is something called the keeper test. And I've heard people in the tech industry describe this as the most terrifying management tool ever invented.
It definitely keeps people looking over their shoulders, but the premise is deceptively simple. Managers are required to periodically ask themselves one question about every single person on their team.
And that question is, if this employee came to me today and told me they were taking a job at a competitor, would I fight hard to keep them?
Right. Would I fight to keep them?
And if the answer is no, if you're secretly a little relieved, or if you just say, okay, good luck, then you are supposed to fire them right then and there.
No performance improvement plans, no 3 strikes and you're out. You just give them a very generous severance package and show them the door.
The phrase they use in the book, and it's quite famous now, is adequate performance gets a generous severance.
It completely rewrites the standard social contract of the workplace.
It really does. Because the standard contract is, hey, I show up, I do my job, I don't break any major rules, so my job is safe.
Netflix explicitly tells its people, we are a team, not a family. Think of it like a professional sports team. If you are a really nice person and you try incredibly hard, but you just can't hit the curveball anymore,
You get cut from the roster.
you get cut. Because they are trying to win championships, not build a community center. They only want the best player for every single position.
But there is a flip side to this that often gets ignored when people criticize the Netflix culture. If you are going to demand that level of elite performance, and if you're going to remove traditional job security, you have to compensate people for that risk.
Oh, absolutely. And the source material goes into deep detail about their compensation philosophy, which is basically paying at the absolute top of the personal market.
This is the counterbalance to the Keeper test.
Yeah.
They don't do standard 3% annual cost of living raises.
No, in fact, they actively encourage their employees to go out and interview with competitors.
Which is wild. In any other company, if you walk into your boss's office and say, hey, I'm interviewing over at Google or Amazon today.
That's a fireable offense, or at least a massive red flag.
Right. But at Netflix, it's just data gathering. You find out your market value, and you bring that number back to your manager.
And if the market says you are now worth $300,000 and Netflix is currently paying you $250,000, they will bump your salary up immediately to match or exceed it.
Because they want to pay you so much that it is financially irrational for you to ever leave.
Exactly. So you have this incredibly high-stakes environment, top-of-market pay, immense talent density, but very low traditional job security.
And once you actually achieve that density, once you genuinely trust that everyone sitting in the room with you is a stunning colleague, then you can unlock the second big pillar from the book.
Radical candor.
Yes. Because if you have a room full of average performers, direct, blunt feedback usually just feels like a personal attack. People get defensive, office politics take over.
But if you have an entire team of high performers who are deeply secure in their actual skills and desperate to improve, feedback stops being an attack and becomes a necessary tool for speed.
Now, radical candor is a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, and it often just becomes a convenient excuse for people to be jerks at work.
Yeah, the classic, I'm not being mean, I'm just being a radically candid excuse.
Right. But Hastings and Meyer outline a very specific, strict framework to prevent the culture from turning toxic. They call it the 4A framework.
And these 4As act as the guardrails for honesty. The first A is aim to assist. You cannot give feedback just to vent your frustration or to tear someone down in a meeting.
The intent has to be pure.
It must be given with the genuine intention of helping that specific person or the company as a whole succeed.
So if I just walk up and say, hey, your presentation today was terrible, that completely fails the first test.
It fails completely. That helps no one. It's just mean. Which brings us to the second A, which is actionable. Your feedback has to provide a concrete alternative way for the person to do it differently next time.
Okay, so a better version would be, your presentation was hard to follow because you buried the main conclusion at the end. Next time, put the conclusion right on the first slide.
Spot on. That is aim to assist, and it is highly actionable.
So those first two are rules for the person giving the feedback. What about the person receiving it?
The receiver has two rules of their own: appreciate and accept or discard.
Accept or discard.
Right. First, you have to actively listen and appreciate the courage it took for your colleague to give you that feedback, because giving tough feedback is inherently awkward.
It's super uncomfortable.
But the final A is crucial: accept or discard. Because of the context, not control philosophy, you are the final decision maker for your own work. You hear the feedback, you appreciate it, but ultimately you can choose to completely discard it.
That's a fascinating dynamic. I could look my manager in the eye and say, I appreciate your feedback on my project, but I'm discarding it because I think my way is better.
And the manager has to accept that as long as they provided the context. And importantly, these feedback loops go in all directions. It is absolutely not just top-down.
Right. There's that great story in the book about Hastings himself getting reamed out early on.
Yes. He was doing these 360-degree reviews, and several employees flat out told him that he was a terrible listener, that he was unapproachable, and that he interrupted people constantly in meetings.
And didn't he take that feedback and literally publish it to the entire company?
He did. He sent it to everybody, which is such a powerful signal. It tells the whole organization, hey, if the CEO can take tough critiques and own them, so can you. It effectively flattens the corporate hierarchy.
Okay, so we've established the foundation here. You build extreme talent density, and you wire those people together with radical candor.
And once you have those two things, you get to the third pillar, the really fun stuff, removing the controls.
This is the stuff that makes traditional HR professionals break out in a cold sweat. No vacation policy, no expense approval chains, no travel policies.
It's where the rubber really meets the road. Most companies write their handbooks to protect themselves against the 3% of employees who might cheat the system or slack off.
The lowest common denominator approach.
Exactly. But Netflix's logic is, hey, we don't hire those people, and because the keeper test, if we accidentally do hire one, they'll be gone in a few months anyway. So why are we burdening the 97% of excellent, trustworthy employees with all this red tape?
Let's dig into the vacation policy specifically. The official policy is essentially take time off when you need it.
Sounds like a dream, right?
It does, but the authors are actually very transparent about the major risk here. They call it the unlimited vacation trap.
Right, because if you don't explicitly tell me I have 20 days of paid time off and I'm working in this hyper-competitive top-tier environment, I might end up taking 0 days.
Because nobody wants to be the one guy on the team who looks like a slacker.
Exactly. Absence can easily be misinterpreted as a lack of commitment. So the book explains that for a no-rules policy to actually function without burning people out, leadership has to go way beyond just passively allowing it.
They had to actively model it. Loudly.
Very loud.
I thought the detail about Hastings sharing his vacation photos was so interesting. It seems like such a trivial, almost cheesy thing to do.
But it's a massive behavioral signal. When the CEO says, I am currently in Italy, I am completely offline for 2 weeks, and look, the company hasn't burned down.
It creates the permission structure for the engineers and the marketers to do the same thing. If your boss works 80 hours a week and never logs off, unlimited vacation actually just means no vacation.
Precisely. You have to lead by example.
Then there's the expense policy, or rather the lack of one. The entire corporate expense policy at Netflix is 5 words long. Act in Netflix's best interest.
It sounds so reckless to a traditional accountant.
Just giving everyone a corporate card and saying, use your best judgment.
But it's actually rooted in pure efficiency. They literally calculated the math on this. The amount of money the company might lose from a few employees occasionally overspending on a fancy dinner or a nicer flight
is significantly lower than the cost of the thousands of hours of management and administrative time spent reviewing, rejecting, and processing individual $20 taxi receipts.
The administrative drag costs more than the potential fraud. Plus, removing that friction lets people move incredibly fast.
But I want to clarify for everyone listening, they do still check, right? It isn't just a blind free-for-all.
Oh, no, they definitely check. They just do it on the back end. It's a system of post-verification, not pre-approval.
So you don't ask to spend the money, you just spend it.
Right. And then the finance team audits a random sample of expenses every month. And if they find out you spent lavishly on something that was clearly not in the company's best interest,
you don't just get a slap on the wrist or a stern email from HR.
You get fired. Immediately, and usually very publicly as a warning to others.
It circles right back to that inherent ruthlessness we talked about at the start. We will trust you completely and treat you like a fully formed adult right up until the exact moment you prove you can't be trusted.
And then you're gone. It is absolute freedom paired with absolute accountability.
Now, this entire model, the blunt feedback, the radical autonomy, the swift firings, it feels very specific to Silicon Valley. It's a very American, hyper-capitalist way of working.
It is deeply rooted in California tech culture.
But Netflix isn't just a California company anymore. They operate in over 190 countries.
Yeah.
And this is where I think Erin Meyer's specific expertise as a cultural researcher really elevates the source material.
It's one of the most fascinating parts of the book, because you simply cannot copy and paste that exact behavioral framework into an office in Tokyo or Sao Paulo and expect it to work.
It was a massive operational hurdle for them. Meyer maps out these deep cultural differences, like take Japan, for example.
Japan is a perfect example. The deeply ingrained cultural norm there is to defer to authority, maintain group harmony, and avoid public confrontation at almost all costs.
So the very idea of a junior marketing assistant raising their hand in a big meeting and giving radical candor to the VP of marketing.
It's practically a social sin. It goes against everything they're taught about professional respect.
There's that incredible anecdote in the book about the silent meeting.
Right. The Netflix executives from America flew over, and they were trying to run a standard open-floor feedback session with the Japanese team. And the room was just dead silent.
Just crickets.
Because nobody was willing to publicly contradict a colleague, it was seen as shaming them.
So what do you do in that situation? Did Netflix just throw up their hands and say, okay, fine, no radical candor for the Tokyo office?
No, and that is the genius of their global strategy. They kept the core principle, but they completely adapted the delivery mechanism.
How so?
Instead of demanding open, spontaneous debate in a large group, they formalized the feedback. They moved it into structured, scheduled one-on-one sessions, or they used written feedback channels, which felt much more polite and less confrontational to the local team.
Oh, I see. So they reframed it.
Exactly. They spent months coaching the Japanese employees that within the specific context of Netflix's walls, true politeness actually means helping your colleague get better, not staying silent while they fail.
That's brilliant. And then conversely, they had almost the exact opposite problem when they opened their office in the Netherlands.
The Dutch. Yes. Dutch culture is famous for being incredibly direct, almost aggressively straightforward.
So when the Americans came in to teach radical candor, the Dutch employees were probably like, yeah, we already do this before our morning coffee.
That's exactly what they said. But the problem was they were actually being far too blunt. They were entirely skipping the aim to assist part of the framework and just delivering really harsh criticisms.
Just using it to be brutally honest without the supportive foundation.
Right. So leadership actually had to step in and coach the Dutch office on the softness of the 4A framework. They had to teach them how to cushion the blow so the feedback could actually be absorbed.
It just goes to show that corporate culture isn't some static poster you hang on a wall. It is a constant living negotiation with the people actually doing the work.
Absolutely. And that relentless adaptability is the only reason Netflix has survived this long.
And really, that's the grand narrative arc of this entire deep dive. We aren't just studying some quirky experimental HR policy here. We are analyzing the exact engine that drove one of the most successful business pivots in modern history.
Just think about the sheer audacity of what they did. They built a truly world-class logistics and distribution business mailing DVDs. They had warehouses everywhere. They were the undisputed best in the world at it.
And then right at the peak of their success, they looked at the data and realized the future was streaming data over the internet.
To make that pivot, they essentially had to cannibalize their own incredibly profitable business. They had to actively make the DVD service less of a priority in order to build the streaming service.
A traditional legacy corporation filled with rigid approval processes and thousands of safe middle-tier managers would literally never have executed that.
Never. The internal politics would have killed it. The DVD division would have fought tooth and nail to protect their revenue stream and their budgets.
But because Netflix had that extreme talent density, their people were smart enough to see the cliff coming.
And because they had removed the bureaucratic controls, they had the institutional agility to turn the massive ship almost instantly.
And then, unbelievably, they did it a second time when they shifted from just licensing old movies to actually producing original content.
The House of Cards gamble.
Yes. They spent $100 million to secure 2 full seasons of a show without ever seeing a single pilot episode.
That is the ultimate example of context, not control. If that decision had been forced through a traditional television network's approval committee, it would have been buried in risk analysis and killed.
But the executive making the deal had the data, they understood the strategic context, and they had the unencumbered autonomy to just pull the trigger.
Now, to be fair to the whole picture, we definitely have to talk about the inherent downsides of operating this way. We've already touched on the baseline anxiety caused by the keeper test.
Yeah, the constant hum of pressure.
But on a purely operational level, this system actively generates mistakes.
It has to, right? When you completely remove the guardrails and the approval processes, smart people are inevitably going to make bad bets.
They will. They'll launch bad features or overspend on marketing campaigns that flop. Millions of dollars will be wasted.
So how does a culture like that handle failure? If I use my freedom to make a bet, and I end up losing the company $50,000, am I instantly getting that generous severance package?
Not necessarily. This is where the nuance is really important. If you bet 50 grand on a hypothesis that was well-reasoned, heavily researched, and aligned with the company context, but the market just rejected it, that is considered a successful learning event.
Okay, so you don't get fired for being wrong.
Correct. But there is a catch. You have to literally sunshine it.
Sunshine it. Meaning what, exactly? Like writing a postmortem memo.
Yes, but way more public. You have to shout your failure from the corporate rooftops so that everyone else in the company can extract the learning value from your mistake.
Mm.
You have to stand up and say, here's what I did, here is why it failed, and here is what we shouldn't do next time.
So you have to swallow your pride completely.
Totally. Now, if you try to hide that failure or sweep the lost money under the rug,
That's a firing offense.
exactly. And crucially, if you make a sloppy mistake just because you were lazy or careless with the details, that also gets you fired. They tolerate bold, well-intentioned failures. They do not tolerate sloppiness.
Hastings actually has a quote in the book where he says, if we aren't failing occasionally, it means we simply aren't moving fast enough.
It's a calculated, fascinating trade-off. They are completely willing to accept the chaos and the financial waste of short-term mistakes in order to guarantee the long-term survival and reinvention of the company.
Because efficiency in the present moment is far less valuable than the capacity to adapt to the future.
That is the perfect summary of the entire Netflix philosophy.
So as we wrap this up today, let's bring it back down to earth for the listener. Because let's face it, most of you listening right now probably don't work at Netflix.
Probably not.
You likely work in an office that does have expense reports and mandatory training modules and an HR department that tracks your vacation days. So what is the actual practical takeaway from all this source material?
Well, you obviously might not have the authority to tear up your company's entire handbook tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
But you absolutely have the power to change the culture of your specific team. Take the 4A feedback framework, for instance. You don't need executive approval to start using that today.
Just starting your next piece of feedback by genuinely asking yourself, am I aiming to assist this person right now?
Exactly. That alone will dramatically improve your working relationships. And on the management side, you can start secretly applying the keeper test.
I was going to say the keeper test feels universally applicable.
I think it's an incredibly clarifying exercise. Even if you never actually fire anyone based on it, just sit down and honestly ask yourself, who on my current team would I genuinely fight to keep?